Our guest today is Mr. Colin Coyne. He's managing principal of the Coyne Group, which is a strategic management and consulting firm here in Birmingham, Alabama. As both a senior executive and as a strategic management consultant, Colin has gained direct experience in almost every functional area of business. Colin's diverse background has helped him develop strong skills in marketing, finance, strategy, and general management, skills that he has applied across multiple industries, including real estate, investment, and financial services, and retail. Colin has worked for publicly traded and private employers. As an employee and as the founder of two successful companies as an employer, he's equally comfortable in both of those settings. He has extensive experience in workout and turnaround solutions as well as in new business development. Colin is nationally recognized for his work in sustainability, emphasizing corporate strategic opportunities and the for-profit business model to enhance business enterprises and communities. With work spanning 18 countries in 25 years, Colin has been directly responsible for more than $1.7 billion of assets within conventional sectors and niche segments, including asset-based organizations as well as service-driven companies. As a resident of Birmingham, Colin is married to Leslie, who's here today. We're glad to have her. And he has a 15-year-old twin girls, Dallas and Ariana, and was remarkably blessed later in life to add a stepdaughter, Zoe, who happens to be a classmate of my son, Zach. Colin graduated from Vanderbilt University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Economics and Business Administration. He then went on to earn the Master's in Management from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University with concentrations in marketing, finance, and international business. He's the published author of numerous articles, editorials, and book chapters, and he's the contributing author to the McGraw-Hill book, The Green Building Bottom Line. Colin currently serves as a lecturer of social enterprise at the Kellogg School at Northwestern, where he teaches sustainable strategy, and is an adjunct professor here at Samford University teaching a course called The Economics of Sustainability. Some of you may also know Colin's father, Ed, who's a longtime employee here at the university who retired last year as the academic coordinator of our academic internship program. Colin, thanks for being here today. We're glad that you're here. Among our group today are business students, both undergraduate, and I see a few graduate students as well, business faculty from across the university, as well as some university guests. You all please join me in giving Colin Coyne a warm welcome. Well, we want to get to know you a little bit first. So tell us a little bit about your college experience, both as an undergraduate and a graduate student. And did you think then that you would be doing what you're doing now as a career?
If I could correct one thing in your introduction, because someday he may see it, I actually have boy-girl twins. My son's name is Dallas. He would be terribly offended at 15 to be referred to as a girl. I went to Vanderbilt as an undergraduate and studied economics and business administration. And then went on to the Kellogg School of Management, where I studied or had concentrations in marketing, finance, and international business. Can I honestly say that when I grow up, I want to be a whatever I am? No, I can't say that. I probably had an inkling that strategy. Probably knew that I wanted to be in an entrepreneurial situation. I knew I wanted to have my own firm someday. But I can't honestly say that I knew that this is the path I wanted to take. I do think there were some seeds planted inside of me just through my upbringing. We can talk about education and the wonderful blessings I had there. But the truth of the matter is the greatest start I got in life and business is because of who my mother and my father were. So something sustainable was in there. I just didn't know how it was going to come out.
As enterprising students are listening, are there things that perhaps you would have done differently in college or graduate?
You mean like study? There's a couple things I would have done differently. One of them, I would have taken better advantage of what was there on campus. And it doesn't really matter if we're talking about Vanderbilt, Kellogg, Samford. The tremendous opportunities that are afforded you every day in terms of not necessarily this particular lecture, but other lectures and opportunities, whether it's the arts, whether it's remarkable business leaders. I don't think I took advantage of those opportunities well enough. The other thing I would change is I went to the 4-quarter program at Kellogg, which is essentially a 1-year program. I would have gone to the 2-year program. I never again will I be surrounded by so many remarkable individuals focused on the same sort of set of objectives, and every day waking up saying, I know more today than I did when I woke up this morning. Now, as you mature and as you go through life and you become sort of an old fuddy-duddy like me now, you start to say, I want to recommit myself to making sure I know something more at the end of the day than I did at the beginning. But in the process of building your career and that sort of thing, you lose sight of that. So now while you have the opportunity to be in an environment where there's really no responsibility, my advice would be you really go for it in your classes and in every way. Think beyond the norm. Think of new and original thoughts. This is the chance where there's no real consequence. And that's easier for me to say sitting here than it is for y'all sitting there, because there's a tendency in our college careers to reduce ourselves to a number, a grade point average, a grade in this course. And if that particular professor doesn't particularly care for the way I like to get outside his model, I can serve a penalty. So I understand that there's a balance there, but I think this is the time to really expand your mind and try new ways of looking at things. Because once you get out in a paying job, rank has its privileges and you tend to have to be a little more conforming.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability. That's a word, a buzzword that's used quite a bit in business today. It's a word, quite honestly, that wasn't used even 10 years ago in the common vernacular of business. And there are lots of thoughts and ideas conjured up when one hears the word sustainability. Talk to us at a macro level about what sustainability is and what sustainability is not.
Okay. I think it's great to start this discussion with a definition. As you go to your different business meetings, whether it's about sustainability or anything else, a lot of times you'll find that the meetings get off track simply because we haven't agreed on the definition of what it is we're talking about. To my tastes, sustainability can be defined and is often defined as this marriage and synthesis between environmental stewardship, social accountability, and financial profit. And it's always presented, and I did it for years, I spoke all over the country, in this Venn diagram, these circles that come together, people, planet, profit. And where they cross over is this little nirvana called sustainability. And what I came to realize about a year ago is that's a very bad way to look at sustainability. While it is good from a definitional standpoint, it is lacking in two regards. One, it doesn't show cause and effect, how one leads to the other. And two, it continues to present sustainability as this notion that it is an end rather than merely a thought process. And it tends to present sustainability as these three separate silos. And it's that siloed thinking that starts to lead people to political labeling and all sorts of things. So about a year ago, we created a new model of strategy at the Coin Group. And we presented it at Kellogg, and that's what led to the course that I teach at Kellogg on sustainable strategy. And the idea is that we have to look at sustainability as part of strategic thought, an unapologetic profit-seeking model. Because here's the reality. Unless and until we learn to speak the language of business to business about business, sustainability will remain nothing more than a motivational poster on the wall. But conversely, until business learns to see social stewardship and environmental stewardship as part of the resource tools available to them as business, we are being poor strategists and we are being poor business people. And so what this model really does is it places existing business strategies in the larger context of the social communities and values and the large environments, land, air, and water, but also legal environments, human resource environments, and that sort of thing. And what you end up with is this thought process that sees, instead of these separate silos, as these individual areas as parts of a larger whole. Just as the body withers if we don't take care of the heart dies if we don't take care of the body. Once we start seeing social stewardship and environmental stewardship and financial stewardship as indistinguishable parts of the whole, we start having much better, much more holistic thinking along the way. And frankly, once you get there, you start seeing opportunities, and more importantly, you start asking questions you simply wouldn't have asked to begin with. And so, I would encourage y'all as you look at sustainability to think of it as a thought process and one where they just come together. Let me give you an example. When Coca-Cola wakes up one day and says, we're the largest user of natural water resources on the planet, and they say, we're going to team up with the World Wildlife Fund to protect 7 major rivers in the United States. Is that environmentalism, or is that protecting their supply chain? Doesn't matter. I worked on a project developing a 4-star hotel in an urban core, and committed very early on that we were going to take those 4-star sheets and towels and everything from the 4-star hotel, and when they got down to 3-star and had to be discarded, we were going to give them to the homeless shelter or the battered women's shelter. Now, is that social do-goodism? Well, to some degree. But what if I told you it reduced vagrancy, which reduced vandalism, which reduces security costs, which also improves the guest experience, which drives revenue? Does it really matter? So at the end of the day, we tend to silo things. Oh, you're a social do-gooder, you're a liberal tree hugger, or you're some capitalist pig. Am I a do-gooder, a tree hugger, or a pig? The answer is yes, I'm all of them, if I'm a good business person. Because one of the definitions of management is simply the ability to allocate finite resources over time for sustained profit. There's nothing political about that. There's nothing socially do-gooding about that per se. It is one of the definitions of management. And when we see that these are indistinguishable, I think we end up in better answers than we would otherwise get to.
As we go today, I want you to help us to connect the dots
Okay.
between those 3 silos and talk to us about how those things work together. Over the past 10 years, I've seen global companies move environmentalism, social responsibility, sustainability from a constraint of doing business, whereas perhaps profit maximization and market share accumulation are the objective of the enterprise, but the other things that we might lump under sustainability are the constraints of the system.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen over the past decade that progressive global firms are moving those what were constraints up to the objective of the corporation. And in doing so, I think there's a shift in values that underlying the whole sustainability movement. There is a value system that undergirds it. Say more about what that value system might look like for various corporations or individuals.
One of the things I try to emphasize in the courses that I teach is you have to understand your personal values before you can start interpreting others. And we go through some exercises in that regard. I also try to emphasize that it is a fundamentally different world out there in a number of ways, and where character is going to become a point of competitive differentiation. It is a flatter world. Where we used to compete with Joe on Main Street, we compete with Sanjay in Mumbai and Carlos in Rio de Janeiro. And so we have to be able to comprehend and understand and respect other people's values and cultures if we choose to do business there. Because whether we mean to or not, or want to or not, we are already doing business there. Accountants are using people in India to do your Alabama state tax return. If you call for an airline reservation, you stand just as much chance of being in Calcutta as you do in Salt Lake City. So it is becoming a flat world. So values have to become viewed on a global basis. And we have to learn as corporations and as business people, but also as individuals, and I'll get on that soapbox later, I promise, to engage in meaningful and respectful dialogue to understand those values. That doesn't mean you compromise or cave into those values, but you have to understand them to be better business people. So I think large-scale global corporations are doing a better job, whether by necessity because of the flattening of the world, or because they're seeing it as a better business model, of seeing that it is. I don't have to feel bad about talking about profit and environmental or social stewardship in the same sentence. Equally, the environmental and social movement has to be less moralistic and less judgmental in saying it's okay to think about profit. Because the truth of the matter is, I sit on a number of boards, and I can tell you the number one thing we talk about is the financial sustainability of those organizations right now. So I think globally, you're starting to see people mesh the two together, not see them as necessarily different areas. My greater question is actually around the motivation behind the firms. You're seeing a lot of knee-jerk reaction to green. Green was the most copyrighted term in 2007. You're seeing a lot of people saying, oh, look, we're the most socially responsible, but then, oh yeah, don't worry about those little issues over here. What is the real motivation? And I think what is lacking is we have not matured yet in seeing it as a part of strategy, overall strategy, that then guides the tactics and the implementation that comes after that. Yes, you're seeing the Walmarts of the world begin to embrace sustainability, but candidly, a lot of their embracing has simply been jamming the costs down their supply line so that they're not incurring it. Now, do I quarrel with the results? In a macro sense, not at all. But are you being authentic up here as well? Once we start integrating those together, I think you'll start seeing quantum leap thinking of the kind that then says, okay, we have a large mining operation in Jamaica, and we've got all these individual people who we have to displace to mine the operations. We can put them back, create them give them fertile soils, create farming, create an indigenous economy around what we're doing, and that sustains my business because the community sustains me. Not surprisingly, that's a very specific example from my upbringing. That's just something I watched my father do with Kaiser bauxite in Jamaica. You see the same thing in some of PepsiCo's efforts in Mexico and how they choose to grow their wheat and stuff using local farming to sustain the community. When we start seeing these things as one integrated strategy, the answers just start coming differently.
You mentioned the green movement, per se, and I think when many of us think about sustainability as a business topic, I think that's where many of us go initially. How is the green movement, how would you define that movement, number one, and then how is that distinct from or complementary to the sustainability, for-profit sustainability model that you've articulated?
I think the green movement is a part of the environmental stewardship, which is part of this bigger notion of sustainability. I think the green movement has largely been driven by people with a greater social conscience and not necessarily a for-profit motive. Now, one thing I should be very clear about, I am as intense and as competitive and as an unapologetic profit seeker as you will ever find. And I make no bones about that. But I also, clearly believe in the benefits of green. What I'm seeing, though, is the business community is co-opting green as a market differentiating issue and therefore cheapening it. And in doing so, I've had clients who've called me up and said, Colin, man, I need you to do something green for me. First of all, what's that mean? Second of all, it's missing the bigger picture. Why? Because somebody does a knee-jerk reaction to green, and then they start applying the normal rates of return formulas, and they realize they've lost their shirts doing it. And then they say, well, green's stupid. And what it sets up, and this really gets to the heart of the issue, is this mentality of or rather than mentality of and. If there's something that fundamentally sets a sustainable thought process apart, it is the belief and the acceptance that we can do this and that it doesn't have to be green or profitable, socially responsible or profitable. You'll see on our website we talk about to say that you can't be sustainable and profitable is as naive as saying you can't have a diverse workforce and be profitable. At some point, you just have to accept the ands of the world, and I think green and continuing to portray things as where green is too narrow and actually helps create that silo effect. It also lends itself to the politicization, if there's such a word, of the issue. And that is deeply problematic right now.
Yeah, and it does seem like that movement has been co-opted in the political arena. But you get to the real heart of the matter for me, and I'm kind of going around it in circles here, and I can't quite seem to drill in. And that is, you mentioned, let's do something green because that will help us to develop a certain market niche, right? That will allow us to differentiate our product and go after the consumer where they are, right? Versus the kind of underlying values that perhaps would serve as motivators from that outside of this notion of trying to go out and capture that market niche. Going back to my earlier comment, does it matter what the motivation is? In other words, should we be concerned with the end result? That companies, whether they're doing it because they feel compelled morally, ethically to be engaged in sustainable activities, do so, or because they do so because they think that that's where their consumers live? should we be that introspective about it? Should a school like Brock be asking those questions?
You're like one of those guys who asked the presidential candidate, 17 questions and the one question they're allowed. If I can remember all of it.
Yeah.
What motivates somebody to get there? I don't care. I don't care. It's in who am I to judge, right? I do become concerned if they don't take a strategic approach, because if the wrong motivation leads them to doing something that's financially ruinous, you would be head to not to begin it. Again, if this doesn't increase your market share, if a green initiative doesn't increase your profitability, if it doesn't at least allow you to live closer to the values you hold as a firm, you shouldn't be doing it. Not because it's necessarily a bad idea, but because you're going about it the wrong way. And here's one of the big catches. A good idea poorly executed looks suspiciously like a bad idea. So what's the difference? Now, to your point about should Brock be doing it, I think the issue there is, are we asking the right questions to begin with? When we work with clients, we like to step back and say, okay, well, let's take Brock as an example. Y'all are building a new school or trying to raise money for a new school. I think y'all may have done this, by the way. I'm just talking in a sort of a model standpoint. You step back and you say, what is the fundamental purpose of being of the Brock School of Business? How are we going to graduate fundamentally different human beings or different business people? Those are the questions that should be asked before you ever look at the physical structure. Because a building is simply the physical embodiment of the values you hold as a community or as a culture. If you ask those questions first, it lends itself to a completely different design, because it may allow you to look at the way you are bringing your education to your students. So, does motivation matter? I guess at the end of the day, once you're doing something, do I care if it also takes care of these other things? No, and who am I to judge? But if you're trying to be strategic in your approach and sustainable in the sense of long-term, sustainable, competitive advantage, and I mean sustainable in the sense of over time, then yes, I do think understanding what your motivations are simply leads to you to ask better questions. The quality of the answer is directly correlated to the quality of the question, and therefore you end up with a far better model.
So part of your role is kind of to be a statesman. You've elevated yourself to that, whether you choose to or not. I think you are viewed as that.
It says more about the state than it does about me.
You certainly have been recognized regionally for your leadership on sustainable issues. You teach a course at Northwestern. You've taught courses here. What are the biggest challenges as you try to teach not only students but presumably business leaders about issues related to sustainability? I would imagine that they bring a lot of baggage into those conversations. What do you have to disabuse those people?
I think that's fair. I would say number one is the mentality of or versus the mentality of and. From the time we're this big, we're raised to siloize our thought process, and that's a natural way of absorbing information. It's getting around that. I think it's regional as well. I think there's different issues we face in Alabama than we do necessarily on a national stage.
We're probably more progressive than most states.
Yeah. Actually, that's an easy one to sort of not sound like a softball, knock it out of the park. I think, no, we're not progressive in one sense, but I think we have extraordinary opportunity that other parts of the country simply don't have if we choose to go there. Which leads me to, I think, one of the other big impediments. And this applies whether you're talking about your personal relationships, you're talking about business, you're talking about sustainability. And that is, I think we have collectively looked at sustainability as an issue, tried to pigeonhole it, tried to politicize it, put labels on it, because we're somewhat stepping back from doing the heavy lifting. And that is understanding that fundamentally we get to choose. One of the questions most often asked is what do I perceive the future of Birmingham to be? And I think, because that's what we do as strategists, we try to look at the future and lay out, what we think is going to happen. And the answer comes across as coy, and I don't mean it to be so. The future of Birmingham or of Brock or of any company that chooses to do something sustainable is whatever you choose it to be. The issue is stepping up and making the choice. Too many of us live our lives or make our business decisions copping out from making the choice. We find an excuse. In the environmental movement, perfection is the enemy of the good. Well, we won't do anything unless it's done perfectly. So that really allows us to step back and not really have to make the hard choice. I don't have all the information I need as a manager, therefore I don't make the choice. The truth of the matter is, And I actually keep these 2 words on the whiteboard in my office. I choose. It is incredibly empowering to realize you have the power to make the choice, but it's also important to realize you have the obligation to make the choice, but you also then have to live with the consequences of that choice and be accountable to those consequences. If we would simply get off the fence and choose, I believe or I don't believe, take all the gray out of the matter, I think that we live our lives far better and better things come. Now, when we talk about the consequences of green, or we talk about the consequences of choice, we tend to think of it in the negative. We tend to think of it in the sense of, oh, therefore you should live with all your mistakes. That's not it at all. The problem with not making choice is you have no ability to take ownership over the things you do right. And therefore you live in this constant state of almost semi-euthanized state. The best we can do if we eliminate all of our mistakes is stay exactly where we are. The only way we get ahead is finding patterns that we can repeat and do over and over again. That is what leads to a sustainable business, to a sustainable community, is making a choice, living with that choice, and repeating the successes that we have. So you have this mentality of or rather than and that precludes certain things, and you have a paralysis and an unwillingness to make a choice. If you look at Birmingham specifically, if you look at Alabama specifically, I think that is a big, big issue. We have to make some decisions, make some choice, and then we have to frame it and start addressing things in a way of civil discourse that we simply aren't doing right now.
I'm a big believer in modeling, and so for our students, for our faculty, for business people, it's always great to look at models, right? Whether they're personalities or corporations or others who are doing this well. If you had to choose, maybe even here locally, Colin, if you had to choose organizations or persons, leaders who are really giving sustainability a thorough look, maybe executing on those notions well, who would those people be those people? And if you're willing, who might be some representatives of the camp that are not thinking about those issues?
Who are the people I don't want to hire me as a client someday, or as a consultant? I think you have to divide that in a couple of layers of thought. I think there are some people who are responding and trying to do something well on a tactical basis. Obviously, as a firm and in creating this new strategy model, I felt that what was lacking was strategic thinking on the issue of sustainability. But having said that, on a national basis, if y'all want to pick up just one book to look at as business students and really just get it quickly, Ray Anderson's Mid-Course Correction is the book to get. Ray is the founder of Interface Carpets, a heavy petrochemical-driven business. You can actually go to TED.com and see 15 minutes of sort of Ray's viewpoint, and I use it in my class. What makes Ray so effective is, yes, he had his epiphany. He saw that the way to change the world, and he got it from Paul Hawkins' book, Natural Capitalism, which is another one that I think is sort of a must-read. And Ray comes across as this sort of just wonderful Southern guy and that sort of thing. But here's a guy who 20 years ago said, I'm going to take my heavy petrochemical business and by 2020 have zero carbon footprint. Publicly traded company, $1 billion a year, and he's still chairman of that company. He didn't get outed. Why? Because he found a way. His profits have only gone up and up and up since he started on this, what he calls journey to climb Mount Sustainability. How does Ray do that? Because Ray Anderson can tell you every single number, every critical success factor, every metric and how to measure it in his organization. He did not subscribe to the thought that to do something that is better for the environment, I must be less profitable. He simply said that will not be the case. We must be more profitable and do these things. And he is doing it. And he tracks every single metric. It is astounding, the detail with which he knows it. Locally, I think there are some firms who are coming around. I think McQuain Pipe is a great example of a firm in a very dirty business that actually, when Ruffner Page and I first talked about the whole issues of green sustainability 5 years ago, he called me because he wanted me, his exact question was, the PVC guys are kicking our rear ends from a marketing standpoint, saying they're more sustainable and they're not, and I'm mad about it. And so we had this conversation that sort of went, well, we can talk about that, the marketing and how to counter them on the green side. But what if I said there was something we could talk about that would improve your situation with the Department of the Environment, with DOJ, because they were in some lawsuits, would improve your union relations and improve productivity in your factories? And I said, well, that's a conversation I want to have. Turns out today, they like to tell a story about a pilot program they did last year where they put it in 2 of their plants. Their return on investment was 300% in 1 year, and that's into perpetuity. And now all the other plant managers are saying, we want to do that. But they had to overcome their own internal skepticism of, oh, you want to do something environmental, well, that's just stupid and it's a waste of time. What the plant managers got was, I am now making more money. Oh, I want to do it. Other people here who do it locally well. I think you have some of the contracting firms that are trying to come around and come to terms with it. And that's easy pickings because a lot of the motion for green sustainability is seen in the built environment. What we try to do is we try to step back and say, it doesn't matter if I'm talking about a building, consumer products, the banking industry. If you have a strategic mindset towards sustainability and you're asking better questions, you'll end up in different places. For example, let's take Regions Bank. I think if Regions Bank, if the banking, or GM, Regions Bank, it doesn't matter, if they had gone back and asked that question I posed earlier about what is the purpose of our being, if you had asked a different question at the beginning, they would be much better off today. If the banks had defined themselves differently and said, we are in the business of creating and nurturing good credit, you wouldn't have seen the mortgage-backed securities issues that have come and crippled a lot of the banking system. If GM had said, we are in the business of meeting the transportation needs, not necessarily wants, of our customers, you wouldn't see the problems they have now. Great example of putting a green Band-Aid on something that's fundamentally flawed. A hybrid Hummer. I mean, give me a break. That's the definition of oxymoron right there. And the Hummer brand just went under. They're done as of last week. So I think if you take this sustainable mindset and the strategy and see it as a strategic issue, you start asking different questions. So I don't see as much of that as I see some people who are trying to implement and be tactical fairly well. I think we still need to evolve to a different level before I could really sit here and say, well, here's a group that's doing it really, really well. Now, to the other side of your question, people who are doing it poorly, I think it would be really easy to pick our utility companies and pick on them. But that's a delicate balance, and that gets around to how you define sustainability. If you want to go just on the environmental scorecard, yes, we have huge coal-driven power structure. But if you look at the economic generating capacity for the state, Alabama Power has been incredible for the state. If you look at some of their social stewardship. So you have to step back from the emotions and quit wearing your political label, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, and you say, what are the and solutions for something like Alabama Power? And I think that a lot of the arguments around bringing green power to Alabama are based on false premises. I think there is an answer you can look at and say, okay, we can bring green power and clean up the factories by taking some of the economic development dollars that are created after the fact and going back and starting to fix the cycle. You don't just have to tax everybody and scare everybody to death that we're going to raise all the power rates. But I think Alabama Power is what I would call someone who has not fully embraced the strategic opportunities for them to grow as a firm because, candidly, they've been beaten so hard by the environmental side of the equation, they're shell-shocked, and it's going to create a distrust on their part. But as a leader in the state, we have to come up and we have to start saying, how do we do it better? So I think it's unfair to say, well, this is a group of people who are doing it badly. I think it is fair to say we need to reframe the debate so that we can have and solutions for people like that.
You mentioned the real estate, commercial, residential, construction, building environment is certainly one where issues of sustainability are raised. And you and I had a long discussion last week, in fact, about our plans for a new facility for this school and what that might entail from not only a mission standpoint and an identity standpoint, but also from a sustainability standpoint. LEED certification, for example, has become, whether we like it or not, LEED certification has kind of become the standard by which we measure whether or not certain construction projects are meeting environmental or sustainable goals. Talk to us about where that industry is going. Right now we've got LEED certification. You might briefly talk a little bit about LEED certification. I bet a lot of our students don't know about it. But where is this going to go going forward?
where the construction industry is going right now is nowhere fast. In fact, just this week I had an article published about the future of the construction industry. Stimulating reading. I recommend it to everybody. But I think you have to look at where the industry is going and why it's gone that way. The construction industry is hurting because of the collapse of the financial markets. The financial markets collapsed, and we did a study on this and found 48 discrete points, yada, yada, yada. But in a nutshell, why the financial markets collapsed is there was a decoupling, a systemic decoupling of risk and reward. First financial classes y'all take, everything they say is risk and reward are related. The greater the risk, the greater reward. Well, for a number of reasons, they got decoupled and the markets crashed. Well, that capital is the feeder stock to the construction industry. No capital, no construction. And so the outlook looks fairly bleak. But where is the ray of hope? The ray of hope is we are now forced to go back to look at the buildings we have now and extract greater value out of them. And the way we extract greater value out of them is making them more efficient. Ergo, the green technologies. So I actually think that the crash in the construction market may be one of the best things in the world for fueling entrepreneurial thought and creating a whole new generation of things that people would not have otherwise paid attention to when money was too fast and loose. Now, for those of you who don't know, when we're talking about LEED, we're talking about Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which is a designation by the U.S. Green Building Council of what constitutes a sustainable building. Actually, what it constitutes is a building that's energy efficient and has better internal air quality and better use of water resources. But it's distinctly around the built environment. It has become sort of the de facto good housekeeping seal of approval. The value of LEED to me is not necessarily the plaque on the wall, although I think there's a reason why you may want to get the plaque on the wall, and I support it. The value of LEED gets to the heart of a strategic approach of approaching sustainability. LEED requires you to have metrics. Most people approach sustainability or green issues on a soft sell standpoint. No, you have to be unapologetic in what metrics you're going to measure your success. It has to be independently verifiable. It has to be independently quantifiable so that you stand the test of not just Colin thinks it's a great green building or Beck thinks it's a great green building. Here are these independent standards. That's the value that LEED has brought, is it creates a floor under which you don't have sort of an ability to chip away at the margins and end up with nothing. One of the greatest challenges I think we face in business, one of the greatest challenges I think any emerging business student faces in their career is the combination of situational ethics and what I call creeping incrementalism. Situational ethics is, we all vary our ethics depending on the situation that we're in. And everybody goes, oh, no, I don't. And then the classic example is, would you steal? No. What if your children were starving? Well, okay. The point is, to some degree, it happens. You just have to be aware of it. You combine that with creeping incrementalism, which is the notion that you make a decision on the margin here, that becomes your starting point for your next decision, which is here and here and here. I don't think the people at Enron woke up one day and said, oh, look, we're going to be bad people. I think what they did is they made a decision on the margin, 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 and suddenly one day they woke up and looked back and went, oh my God, we're all the way over here. Then it became a bridge too far, and then they started making the truly unethical decisions. But that's how they got there in the first place. So mark my words, situational ethics and creeping incrementalism are the challenges you always face in your career. What LEED does in the built environment is removes your ability to do that because it's independently quantifiable, independently verifiable, and it's fully transparent. And that is the value LEED brings to it. If you take that thought process and that methodology to your construction, whether you choose to get the LEED plaque or not is actually a secondary issue. And that's marketability and that sort of thing. The truth of the matter, if I'm trying to raise money for the Brock School of Business's new building, and I look at somebody and say, and it's going to be a LEED Gold certified building, that stops 20 minutes of discussion of explaining things. Right. And people think they know what that means, and it's very, very efficient. So it has a value on the dollar raising side, but it really has a value in terms of the thought process. At the end of the day, you end up with a building that lasts longer, that is cheaper to maintain, uses less resources into perpetuity. The indoor air quality is better for the students. The average learning scores are higher. It's been proven. You just end up with a better occupant experience. And that's what, to me, building a school should be about. It's what does it do for the people that are in the building and nurturing them. that it's a physical structure is secondary.
Well, we've got some students who want to ask some questions, and so I'll ask Cameron. Cameron Collins, where are you, sir? Cameron.
Hey, how are you doing? I was going to ask how Samford could implement some of this sustainability into our everyday tasks.
Okay. I think the first, as I've alluded to, the first step is decide why you want to do it. The second step is to decide in terms of what values matter and what are the ones you want to highlight, and how do you want to define sustainability. It'd be easy to sort of flippantly say, well, you can instantly go to two-sided copying and everything. One class project from my group at Kellogg this quarter was they were talking about Kellogg becoming more sustainable, and they said we should create a sustainability code, like an honor code, that the faculty and the students, now it's not administered quite like the honor code, but by raising the awareness and raising the commitment, and you're seeking sort of commitment, not compliance. It'd be easy to be flip and say, okay, here's 12 things you might want to do. But I think you really have to go back and say, why are we doing it? What is it we're trying to achieve? And then you say, okay, tactically, how do we want to go about that? And you need dedicated leaders to lead the effort, and you need dedicated followers to follow the effort. And so by that, I mean, it's not as easy to say, this is what we three think we should do. It has to be something that collectively comes up. And I think understanding that the definition of sustainability is broader than just we're going to double-side copy. There's an issue of this fabric of community that exists on a college campus. At the end of the day, why do we pursue sustainability? Because it should nurture the community fabric. And if you approach it from that standpoint, you might find yourself looking at initiatives you might not otherwise consider. You might think of things of hosting forums or debates with people with very opposed point of views to ones you might have. Why do I think that's important? Why do I think Samford's the perfect place to take that as part of sustainability? Because I actually believe that one of the great failings of my generation to yours is we are just slowly destroying the process of democracy, which makes this country what it is. That sounds very hyperbolistic, I admit that. And I can talk about it purely from a competitive advantage for business standpoint, if you like. But we are squashing the debate. And if you squash the debate by saying, if you don't agree with me, I just don't want to talk to you, we're abdicating our role in democracy. Because democracy only works if you have the collective thoughts of the people. The majority gets its way, but it's not just the majority who gets its way, it's the majority who will live by that way. I'm sick to death of blue state, red states, blue dots, red dots. In fact, I conscientiously wore a purple tie here today. Because here you want a specific example of how not only can you improve sustainability at Samford, but you could actually, and you're going to love this one, I think you could actually right here, right now decide that you want to game change the national debate and the international debate on sustainability. I think what we need is to simply go out and produce a bunch of purple dots. And what we are saying is we hold our democracy and we hold the necessary debate and the forum for civil debate above any individually held position. We are going to put the whole ahead of the individual because we will come up with better ideas than we're coming up with now. Now, lest you think that sounds overly simplistic, I watched my mother and my father change the landscape in Jamaica simply from a conversation and sitting around a backgammon table in our living room when the political strife was at its worst, when quite literally people from one political party were setting fire to apartment buildings of the other, and as they came out, taking the babies and throwing them back into the fire. That's a long way you've got to come. And my mom simply said, when are we going to start putting Jamaica first? And my father, who was in a fortunate position as president of Kaiser Bauxite, said, I have the resources to do something about that. Oh, by the way, was that a profit-driven thing for my father? Or was it social do-gooding? Or did protecting the political stability of Jamaica help his entire company? See, sustainability has been around here forever. We just didn't have the label that we put on it. And so, Kaiser Bauxite went out and produced all these bumper stickers that said Jamaica first. And it changed the way people viewed what they had to think about. And it changed the political landscape in Jamaica. I'm quite sincere. you guys decide you want to go out and do purple dots, they'll be all over the country in 3 months. And it began right here. So when you ask the question, what can we do at Samford to do something more sustainable? Don't confine yourself to the border of the campus. Think bigger than that. But there really is no limit. Just ask the right questions.
Right. Mallory James. Mallory.
Hi. Well, I went to South Africa over Jan term, and while we were there, we visited their Sustainability Institute. Part of the institute was a school, and the school ran off of no electricity and had no heating and air conditioning because it was perfectly positioned where it would catch all the sunlight during the day, like through all the windows, and it had vents in the walls that breeze could come through, so it never needed heating or air conditioning. And they taught all the students to farm organically, like in a garden they had outside. Do you think this extreme of sustainability would be useful in America? And if so, what actions would need to be implemented for like schools and businesses and neighborhoods to do things to this extreme?
Yes, depending. For example, we could sit here and say we're going to put Samford on solar cells tomorrow. But the fact is we're in zone 3 solar zone. It's not efficient. So you're wasting financial resources you wouldn't otherwise have to waste. What you're talking about in South Africa is understanding your site selection is a big part of the equation. If you can capture natural sunlight or natural wind patterns or that sort of thing, you should be using them to your advantage. What we really have to get to in the built environment is changing the way we go about our design of our buildings. Right now, we tend to have this architect does the schematic, the conceptual design, gives it to the designer does it, passes it to the schematic guy then sends it over to the mechanical, plumbing, and engineering engineers, and it's all this cubicle to cubicle process. What you saw in South Africa is what is really becoming the change in how buildings are being built, and we have to go this way to be able to afford them in the future. You're starting to see the contractor and the architect and the engineer and everybody be brought to the first meeting. And so you're starting to say, okay, instead of doing cookie cutter buildings, we're going to do it unique to the site and capture the opportunities we have intrinsic on that site. So for example, wind turbines would not be really, really smart here. But the Kellogg School of Management is building a new school right on Lake Michigan where the wind blows all the time, especially when it's 10 degrees below and colder. I think that's a natural fit. But geothermal, underground heat exchange, might be very practical here. Deciding what assets you have naturally in your environment and then designing around those, yes, I think that is an extreme that makes sense. But I don't think is making something that is financially stupid, because that's not sustainable in and of itself. And believe me, there are enough doubters out there that they're just waiting to see something green fail. So you're better off to have not done it at all than to do it and to fail, because that simply gives the naysayers their opportunity to pounce on it and say, see, all that global warming stuff doesn't make any sense at all. There's no such thing as global warming. And I think we have to be cognizant of the debates and the yin and the yangs and the push and the pulls of that. And to those of you who sit here and think there's no such thing as global warming, happy to have that discussion with you, but probably not right now.
Carmen Truelove. Carmen, where are you?
Yes. In your opinion, should being green or eco-friendly be a main or primary goal for a new company, or would you suggest it be a secondary goal?
I think that gets to the heart of the model that, however inarticulately I may have expressed it, that we created. I think the answer is they're indistinguishable parts of one another if you're doing it right. Having said that, I do think that, as I said, unless it increases your profitability, unless it increases your market share, which should lead to long-term profitability, or at the very least allows you to position yourself closer to the values you hold forth, which would have a marketing and branding advantage, you shouldn't do it. Again, not because it's the wrong thing to do, but because you probably haven't thought it through well enough and you're not doing it right. I think for business, which is whether you're classed as a nonprofit or not, you still have to have more revenues than expenses. Yes, I think you have to approach it from a for-profit model. And I think you have to be, I think the environmental side of the equation has to understand that and embrace that and respect that. I serve on a number of environmental group boards. And one of the hardest things I've tried to convey to them is, you can sit here and sue the pants off of somebody after the river's polluted, but if your real mission and purpose of being is to protect the river, don't let it get screwed up in the first place. So get involved as part of the solution up front, not closing the door of the barn after the cows have escaped. So the for-profit model has to be embraced, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead the charge. And what we saw, by the way, in the 80s, in my generation, I graduated from Kellogg in 85, so I'm not pointing the finger at anybody but myself when I say this, is the abject failure of American business to take into account that long-term value creation in firms is more than just about a pure dollar number measured on a quarter-to-quarter basis. In fact, I would argue quite passionately that our whole model for conventional financial theory is off base for a number of reasons, because we're not valuing things quite the way we should, or capturing long-term value. So again, your answer is, I realize I'm giving a long answer to a short question. It's not as simple as which one comes first, chicken or egg. They're part and parcel together, but we have to frame the debate differently and look at the structures in different ways. But at the end of the day, if you're not profitable, you're out of business and you become irrelevant.
We'll throw it wide open here. Any other questions from our students or faculty?
Me? Okay, just a simple question. Since people really care about the go green things now, so what do you think? Which industry will increasing because go green point in the future? This kind of thing.
Okay. And let me answer that not just by industry, but by the state of Alabama, because I alluded to this earlier. We were asked to give some advice to one of the gubernatorial candidates, and I'm actually giving a speech on Friday to the northern mayors in North Alabama. And the speech is essentially about sustainability as a model for economic development in the state of Alabama. We have a unique opportunity in the state because of our natural resources, because of labor cost advantages, and of a number of other things, to grow some industries that literally I don't think can be grown elsewhere. And I think we're missing a terrible boat if we don't embrace it. Some examples. Let's look at the Black Belt. You have poor farming, low wage labor, and you got bingo as the central debate that's out there. The problem with bingo is it's a parasitic industry that doesn't really have spillover benefits. And the Black Belt farming, Black Belt has been a problem for the state forever, and everybody sort of just ignored it. But here's this great green opportunity, right? Green is aware. What is the fastest growing area of the supermarket right now? Organic produce. Why isn't it growing faster? Because it's expensive. Why is it expensive? Because it's labor intensive. Wait a minute. We have incredibly rich fertile soils. We have a labor cost advantage. And oh, by the way, to solve the long-term profitability issue as production rises, we have remarkable research and development in Huntsville, Birmingham, and we have the Port of Mobile to export from. Why shouldn't the state of Alabama stand up and say, tomorrow, we are going to become the home for organic produce worldwide? Florida got its orange juice, California got its raisins, Georgia has its peaches. We are going to be about organic produce. There's a great growth industry right there that takes all these things that are traditional weaknesses and turns them to strengths for Alabama. I think Alabama could benefit biofuels, particularly algae, is becoming something that's looking very, very promising. We can grow algae in Alabama. We have remarkable research and development capabilities. We can capitalize on that. We have distribution networks. We have rail and water and international airport. I think there's things we can do if we choose to. Again, I go back to that thing. We choose. What do we choose? We can talk about it, but as we've talked about it for the last 2 years, and people go, oh, that's a great idea. There's something that I'd proposed a couple years ago in the Birmingham Business Journal, said, oh, great idea, and everybody got all excited about it, and then nothing happened. 2 years hence, this city over here is saying, well, we're going to be this on sustainability, or we're going to be the greenest on this. The fact of the matter is you can stand up and say, we're going to be green, but if you don't have the fundamentals in place, and we do in Alabama, the most productive, highest quality auto manufacturing facilities in the world are in Alabama. We've proven it. So I just think we need to look at this multi-billion dollar industry. I think it's projected to be a $1 trillion industry by 2020 in its nascent stages. And we just need to say, what part do we want to own? What do we choose? What do we strategically say we have a competitive advantage in being able to embrace? Now let me take one other, if I may, take it one other place you might not expect. Something that you asked, what are in the industries that have opportunity? Let me take sustainable thought and show you how it applies in a completely different area. We can fix our city school systems, I believe, overnight. Pretty bold, right? Because we're out there, been trying to do it for 20 years. How do we do it? Ironically, Birmingham's already done the hard part. Birmingham, as of January 2009, had $428 million sitting in a bank account because of the 1% sales tax that they raised. And they're about to go out and spend all this money on building new schools. It's the last thing you want to do. What you want to do is you want to create the first endowed public school system. Take the $428 million, put it in T-bills, and you can support about $225 million of new construction, which is still a boatload of schools. What's the difference? Well, if we sit here and do it the way they want to do it, $428 million, you build them, you have $428 million, but 25 years later, you have buildings that are written down, having increasing maintenance costs, and there's only down to $225 million, and you have no cash in the bank. Create the endowed public school system, $428 million supports $225 million of construction. 25 years from now, you have $225 million of assets that are written down to $110 million, but that $428 million is still sitting in the bank. And you can do it again and again and again and again, and you apply it into perpetuity. Believe me, if you want to think sustainably, you have to solve the education problems in Alabama. Crime is related to it. Childhood obesity, which are health issues, is related to it. You fix that nut, you crack that nut, and suddenly you can attract business to the state of Alabama. Bang, 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 bang. You know what the neat thing about that solution is? If the legislature down in Montgomery would simply say, okay, we're going to create the law that allows for this, any city can choose to do it. We're not making them do it. We're not making people raise taxes. We're not making people do a thing. What we've done is we've given them control of their destiny, and they can choose to solve their school problems once and for all or not. So I offer that as an example. When we've talked about sustainability and sustainable thought, it's easy to think of it in terms of just green or widgets or algae or power. But this sustainable strategy, this notion of seeing strategy within the context of the context, parts of the living whole, allows us to go almost anywhere and fundamentally change our thought process and address the bigger issues. Believe me, we start having the top schools. There's actually other tiers to the school solution problem that I won't bore you with right now. But if you fix the school solution, you fixed a lot of business profitability. And suddenly Birmingham, instead of declining and declining and declining, gets bigger. You know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we competed with Charlotte. We competed with New Orleans. We competed with Cincinnati. 10 years ago, we started competing pretty much just with Atlanta, and now we compete with Huntsville and Mobile, and we're losing. You know, we have to address the problem in big, holistic ways. And we're not going to address it if we keep name-calling and finger-pointing and that sort of thing.
Well, unfortunately, time's our enemy today. Colin, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've given us a great insight and new knowledge into this issue of sustainability. Would you all join me in thanking Colin for